video, I'm going to concepts of market equilibrium, surplus and shortage. We're going to begin with the concept of market equilibrium. Market equilibrium occurs where demand is equal to supply. And we can see that if I draw a demand and supply diagram. I'm going to start with P on my vertical axis, Q on my horizontal axis, downward sloping demand curve that I'm going to label D, upward sloping supply curve that I label S, and where the curves cross, I'm going to do dashed lines to the axis, and this axis I'm going to label PE, and QE is the label for this axis. And so we have here the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity, and this is at market equilibrium because this is where demand is equal to supply. What this means, this concept of market equilibrium, is that unless there is a change in either demand or supply, the price and the quantity will stay stable at these points here. In order to deepen our understanding of the concept of market equilibrium, we need to consider what would happen if the market was not in equilibrium, and we're going to begin by considering a situation known as a surplus. If we have a surplus in a market, that means that the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, and another way of saying that is that we have excess supply in the market. Let's see how it looks on the diagram. So again, labeling the vertical axis P, horizontal axis Q, downward sloping demand curve labelled D, upward sloping supply curve labelled S, and this time I'm going to select a price that is greater above the equilibrium price, such as this price here P, higher than the equilibrium, because the equilibrium would be where the curves cross, it's higher than that, this price here, price P. And I'm going to do a dashed line across until I get to my demand curve, and then dashed line down to this axis. I'm going to call that point there QD. What I'm saying is that at this quite high price here, not very many consumers are willing to pay that high price. The quantity demanded is quite low. If I keep going along this dashed line until I reach my supply curve, and then go down to this axis and label that point there QS, you can see that at this quite high price, producers are willing to produce a large quantity of this product. That makes sense. A high price means that they can make lots of profit. They're willing to produce a lot. And what we have here is a situation known as a surplus, because quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded, like it says here. What I'm going to do underneath is just outline, bullet point the key points of how we get from this situation of a surplus back to our market equilibrium. And our starting point, like we have here, is we have a price that is above the equilibrium price, and consequently, just like we just described, we have a situation where quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. In order to understand what happens next, you need to think about this situation from the perspective of a producer, from a firm, from a business. They've got a situation where they've got a lot of products that they're unable to sell at this price. Think about a shop with lots of products on the shelves, no consumers want to buy. Business has got a surplus of products. How are they going to deal with that situation? How are they going to remove that surplus? Well, one strategy they might try is they might reduce the price. And so that's my third point here. We have a lower price. Price starts to come down. Price is reduced, starts coming down. And as that price falls, we have then a change in demand and supply. As the price comes down, demand extends. a lower price means that more consumers are going to want to purchase that good. And also, at the same time, we have supply contracting. If you want more detail on extensions and contractions, you can see my previous video. And this process is going to continue, falling price, demand extending, and supply contracting, until the price reaches the equilibrium price here, PE. Once we reach that equilibrium price, demand and supply are equal to each other, and therefore there is no longer a surplus in this market. And because there's no loss, this market is continuing to fall, and so the metals stabilizes at this price here, PE, and the quantity is QE. And here, because demand and supply are equal to each other, we've reached this situation known as market equilibrium. So my final point here is going to be that market equilibrium is reached, and we have a price of PE and a quantity of QE. Okay. And then the final situation for us to consider is the situation where we have a shortage in the market. This is the reverse of a surplus, the opposite of a surplus. Now quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied, and another way of saying that is we have excess demand. Again, I can demonstrate that concept on a demand and supply diagram. So I'm going to draw my curves. Downward sloping curve labelled demand, upward sloping curve labelled supply. And in order to demonstrate a shortage, this time I need to start with a price that's below the equilibrium price, down here. And again, dashed line across, initially till I get to my supply curve. I'm going to call that point there QS. At these quite low prices, producers are not willing to produce very much of this good because the profit being made is quite low. But at this low price, consumers are willing to purchase a lot of this good because the price is so low. And so therefore what we have is a situation of shortage or excess demand because quantity demanded is larger than quantity supplied. So I'm going to complete my step-by-step written analysis here in a similar way to above. So firstly we have price that is below the equilibrium, and that means, like we've said above, that quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. Now, in a similar way to the previous example, to understand the next step, we need to think about this situation from the perspective of a firm, from the perspective of a producer. The producer has a shortage of products to sell. There are more customers wanting to buy products than they've got products available. Imagine a shop with a queue out of the door, something like that. What would a producer do in that scenario? Well, one thing they might do is they might increase their prices. And so here we have a situation where prices start to rise. And as prices start to rise, two things happen. Demand starts to contract, moving along the demand curve in this way, and supply starts to extend, moving along the supply curve in this way. So I'm going to make a note of those points there. I've got demand contracts, and at the same time supply extends. And this process continues, rising prices, supply extending, demand contracting, until this point here is reached, this price here is reached, PE. Once prices go all the way up to PE, we no longer have a shortage in the market because demand and supply are equal to each other. And because we no longer have a shortage in the market, there's no reason for the price to continue to rise. And so here we've reached a situation of market equilibrium. Demand is equal to supply, price is PE, quantity is QE. And so my final point here of written analysis, I'm going to say that market equilibrium is reached and the price is PE and the quantity is QE. So what this entire page shows is that regardless of where the price begins. If it begins above market equilibrium or if it below market equilibrium, there will be pressure to return the market back to its equilibrium where demand equals supply and the price will be at PE and the quantity will be at QE.